Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. Here we're holding a Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and in Yirtz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Kuf Pei Hey Amid Beis, starting a new Siman, Siman Shin Lamed Tes. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on Kuf Pei Hey Amid Beis. I guess you would call it 3 lines down in the Shulchan Aruch, with the beginning of Siman Shin Lamed Tes. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, Hanesuna Batzara Ubashivya. Haim de bein bayam ubein bayabasha hamakim yerachem aleihem v'yitzia mitzar lervacha me'afela la'ira mishibud l'geula hashta bagala of Zman Kariv and Emar Amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, Esther Fradel bas Chana, Meshamer ben Esther Fradel, Yitzchak ben Tzion ben Dusha, Rivka bas Shiraleah, Chavadasa bas Serel, and Gila Shifra bas Ilana Udel. They should all have a refuah shalema B'Seich Shar Chole Yisrael. I want to begin today, not even on the page of the Mishnah Berurah. I want to begin today with a word about current events. Many people today are very concerned, very anxious about some of the results of the elections in the United States. For people who live in New York City, it is now seen that it is now completely acceptable to be an overt anti-Semite, to be overtly anti-Israel, and still to hold prestigious public office. This is what we see with the election of Mamdani here to the mayoralty of New York City. And like I said, many people are anxious about it. They're walking around and say, oh, you can't believe it, everything else. So I have a quick comment that I'd like to make on it. And that is, we should take a lesson from Yetzias Mitzrayim. When we look at the events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, one of the things that we see at the end of Parshas Shemos is that one thing that had to happen right away in the beginning of the Geula from Mitzrayim is that the Shibud had to get worse. Think about it. What happened? Klal Yisrael was living through the Shibud, and the Rabbeinu Shalom sent Moshe Rabbeinu to go take Klal Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu comes, and he goes to see Paroi, and he tells Paroi that it's time to let the Bnei Yisrael go, and I'm here to take the Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. What happens? Paroi sends him packing, and the first thing that happens is the Shibud gets worse. That's when Paroi said, I'm no longer giving Klal Yisrael teven, I'm not giving them straw to go mix into the bricks to make bricks. From now on, they're going to have to go out and find the straw themselves, and yet they're going to have to meet the same quota of bricks that they met before. Moshe Rabbeinu himself was very upset about this. Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Rabbeinu Shalom and said, Lama zeh shlachtani. You gave me a whole speech on Har Sinai. You told me that you saw the Shibud of Bnei Yisrael in Mitzrayim. You remembered the bris with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. You're sending me to go take the Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. And now, Lama zeh shlachtani, why did you send me? I came, I went to Paroi, and what did I do? I made everything worse. And now suddenly everything is worse. Why did it have to happen that way? Well, one of the reasons it had to happen that way is because of a very famous Chovos HaLevavos that I've quoted many a time here on these airwaves. And that is that in the beginning of Shar HaBitachon, the Chovos HaLevavos makes it very clear. A person has to put all of his bitachon in the Rabbeinu Shalom. Says the Chovos HaLevavos, and he brings rayos from Psukim, that if you place your bitachon in anything other than the Rabbeinu Shalom, then ultimately the Rabbeinu Shalom will make that thing that you put your faith in will fail. The Rabbeinu Shalom will show you that you cannot put your faith in anything other than the Borei Olam. When it came time for Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Rabbeinu Shalom did not want a situation where Moshe Rabbeinu would come, and Moshe Rabbeinu would say, I'm here to take Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim, and suddenly people would place their betachon, they would place their faith in Moshe Rabbeinu. They would say, oh, we have a savior. Moshe Rabbeinu is going to come, and he's going to be very persuasive, or whatever it is, and he's going to go take us out of Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu came, and the first thing that happened was the Shibud got worse. The people had to see that Ein Lanu Amilu Hishayin Ela Alavinu Shebashamayim, There's nothing that we can have faith in, only the Ribbono Shel Olam. We live in times where it could be people here in the good old US of A have become too comfortable with putting their faith in the protections of the United States government, putting their protections in a piece of paper known as the Constitution, where there are many of those on the left wing of the political stratosphere here in the United States who have started openly mocking the idea that the Constitution is really something that has to be adhered to. It's an old contract that was written up by a bunch of wealthy white landowners. And how do they represent all of us? And it's over 200 years ago. And why are we beholden to it? All it is a piece of paper. There are those that were very happy to put their faith in the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, for decades and decades, the Democratic Party has been staunchly pro-Jewish, pro-Israel. No longer. Now the Democratic Party is a hotbed of anti-Semitism. Indeed, it's no longer the Democratic Party. It's the Democrat Socialist Party. We lived through socialism. We know what the Soviet Union was all about. It wasn't any friend of ours. So, faith in the Democratic Party? I don't think so. There are those now who want to put their faith in the Republican Party. Really? The right wing of the Republican Party is now turning into a cesspool of anti-Semitism. So, they're coming at us from the left. They're coming at us from the right. You know, Trump? Again, you can't put your faith in anything or anyone. Then there are those that turn around and say, well, Baruch Hashem, we have Eretz Yisrael, and we have a Yiddish government in Eretz Yisrael. So people think, well, in 1938 we had nowhere to run. Now we have a safety net. And indeed, those in Eretz Yisrael that are in power, they like to make that argument. They say that Eretz Yisrael, the state of Israel, is the safety net. Really now. The truth is that if you're a frumma, and I don't want to get into this piece of political thorn bush, but you do see how those in power are now coming after Haredim. So do we necessarily have friends over there? No. And not only that, Eretz Yisrael, what is Eretz Yisrael putting their faith in? Those in power in Eretz Yisrael. You know, it's very nice that the rockets come and they don't land. Why? Because you have Patriot missiles. Where do the Patriots come from? They come from the US of A. Well, what happens if the Democratic Socialists take over? One of the first things that will happen if the Democratic Socialists take over is that the flow of arms from the United States to Israel will grind it to a halt because they don't want to be complicit in genocide. So you can't put your faith in any of these things. The only place that we could put our bitachon is in the Ribbono Shel Olam. So the truth is that take heart. There's no need, really, to be all anxious and all nervous and all upset. What you have to do is you have to work on tefillah, you have to work on Torah, you have to work on emunah and bitachon, you have to work in constantly thinking, Anu maminim b'nei maminim, v'ein lanu al mi lehishayin ela al avinu shebashamayim. We don't put our faith in any of these institutions. Al tiftachu b'nedivim. We don't put our faith in any of these people. We don't put our faith in any of these governments. We don't put our faith in any of these militaries. We don't put our faith in weapons systems. We don't put our faith in any of these things. The only place that we put our faith is al avinu shebashamayim. And if we place our bitachon in the Ribbono Shel Olam, if we put our trust in Him, and we look only to Him, and we're mispalel to Him, then the Ribbono Shel Olam will certainly take care of Klal Yisrael. And now, finally, we can turn to today's Mishnah Berurah shir. So, Siman Shin Lamites, Kama Dinim Pratiyim Hanoyahagin B'Shabbos. Various detailed halachas that pertain to Shabbos, Ubai Sayin Seifim, and here we have 7 Seifim. Rabbi Isai, it's apparent that we're coming to the end of Chelik Gimel. And now here in Siman Shin Lamites, we have a Siman that's kind of like, all right, it's time to start taking care of miscellaneous. It's time to start taking care of halachas that didn't necessarily fit in. We did not for a whole siman. So now we're starting to take care of miscellaneous items. We're doing housekeeping. So says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Ein roichven al gabe behema. You're not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos. V'ayin le'el Siman Shin Hey Sif Yud Ches midin halichas karoin. Take a look at Siman Shin Hey Sif Yud Ches, where we discussed the halachas that pertain to riding on a wagon that's being pulled by an animal on Shabbos, which is also aser, because riding on that wagon is called being mishtamish bebehema. It's called making use of an animal on Shabbos, which is aser. So you're not allowed to ride on an animal on Shabbos. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Katan Aleph, Ein roichvin la'el b'siman shin hey sif yud ches, beyarti b'Mishnah Berurah hatam v'chol pratein. Over there, we discussed the reason for this halacha, and we go into it in detail. And the truth is that this halacha was covered in detail in Siman Shin Hey. Why is it here in Siman Shin Lamed Tes? Could be because it's very similar to another halacha that we spoke about recently, and that is the isser of being mishtamish be'ilan. You're not allowed to make use of a tree. So too over here, you're not allowed to be mishtamish bebehema. You're not allowed to be mishtamish with a bal chai. You're not allowed to make use of an animal on Shabbos. Indeed, these two halachas are very similar. We saw by an ilan, by a tree, that there's an isser to be mishtamish be'ilan. We said, what does that mean? You're not allowed to climb up into a tree. You're not allowed to suspend yourself from a tree. You're not allowed to lean against a tree so that it's supporting your full body weight. Many of these halachas apply the same way to a bal chai. You're not allowed to go up onto a bal chai and ride on it. You're not allowed to suspend yourself from a bal chai. You're not allowed to lean against the side of an animal. All of these things are aser because they're called being mishtamish be'ilan, being mishtamish b'bal chai, making use of a bal chai. Why are you not allowed to make use of a bal chai? It's an issa d'Rabbanan. What's the issa d'Rabbanan? We're afraid that if you're going to come to make use of a bal chai, you might go ahead and break a branch off of a tree to use it as a switch, to use it as something to hit the animal, to make the animal go. So once again, the same way there's an isser of being mishtamish be'ilan because we're afraid that you might come to toilish, so too there's an isser of being mishtamish b'bal chai, again because we're afraid you might come to the isser of toilish. And again, like it says here in the parentheses, see Shin Hey Sif Yud Ches, and the Mishnah Berurah there for greater detail. Sif Beis says to Mechaber, Ein shotin al pnei hamayim. You're not allowed to go swimming. You're not allowed to go into the water and go swimming. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does it mean to swim? Says the Mishnah Berurah's Katan Beis, al pnei hamayim. You're not allowed to go swimming. The words of the Mechaber are, you're not allowed to swim al pnei hamayim, on the surface of the water. Now, this does not mean that you can't swim on the surface of the water, but you're allowed to swim underwater. That's not what it means. So why this funny turn of phrase, that you're not allowed to swim al pnei hamayim? Explains the Mishnah Berurah, al pnei hamayim, biyodov v'raglov, so that you're swimming using your hands and your feet. What's the point? Shegam raglov okar min karka hamayim. Mishnah Berurah explains the point over here is that the isser of swimming pertains when your feet are off the ground. If your feet are on the ground, if you're walking in the water and your feet are touching the ground, you're not considered to be swimming. So then the issa d'Rabbanan against swimming would not apply. Now, there are going to be other problems. I'm not telling you that you're allowed to go to your backyard to go into a swimming pool. We're going to discuss that in a moment. But as far as this issa d'Rabbanan is concerned, the issa d'Rabbanan against swimming, prohibits going into the water, removing your feet from the ground, and swimming in the water. That's what's called swimming. Vatam, what's the rationale? Why do we aser swimming? Midrabanan, shemayase chavis shel shayatin. You might make a flotation device. That's what a chavis shel shayatin is. Literally, it means a barrel of swimmers. Kidemisayim lekamon, like the Mechaber himself, I believe, is going to say. He will. Now, what is this chavis shel shayatin? Says the Mishnah Berurah, vu kli shel goyme. This was a vessel of some kind that was made out of woven reeds. Sha'arganoisai, they would weave the reeds together. V'oisid kimin chavis aruka, and they made like a long barrel. Lil Moidboy Loshot al Hamayim, and this was used to teach people how to swim. So what is this? It's a flotation device. They made some kind of flotation device by weaving reeds together. Now, to make that flotation device on Shabbos would be an Issa Daraisa. That would be Makeh B'Patish, Tikkun Moneh. So it would be an Issa Daraisa to go ahead and make the Chavish al Shayatin. We're afraid if we're gonna allow going swimming on Shabbos, you might come to make the Chavis Shal Shayatin. Now, it's very important to understand that that's the underpinning of the Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming, because now we're going to parse when the Issa D'Rabbanan applies and when the Issa D'Rabbanan does not apply, and it's going to ride on this question. So going back to the Mechaber said, Ein shatan al pnei hamayim, you're not allowed to go swimming on the water. Now, says the Mechaber, this halacha applies afilu b'breicha shebechotzer, even in a pond that is in a chotzer. What's the point of a chotzer? It's an enclosed chotzer, so it's a reshus hayachid. What's the point? If you're swimming in a breicha that's in a chotzer, there is no issue of haitzah. When you're swimming in a pond or a pool that's in a reshus harabim, there's a potential issue of haitzah. How do you come to haitzah? Well, when you swim, you splash. When you splash, you uproot water from the body of water that you're in, and you send it flying. Now, if you uproot water and you send it flying daled amos in reshus harabim, you just accomplished the Issa Daraisa of haitzah. So, one problem that could be involved in swimming in a breicha, swimming in a pond, a man-made pond in reshus harabim, would be a problem of haitzah. The Mechaber is telling you over here, there's another problem with swimming in a breicha. You're not allowed to go swimming in a breicha, even if the breicha is in a chotzer. Why? Mipnei shekishahamayim ne'ekarim v'yotzim chutz labreicha dami l'nohar. Now, before I explain to you what this line of the Mechaber means, we need a little bit of a background. We said the reason there's an Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming on Shabbos is because we're afraid you're going to make a Chavis Shal Shayatin. Now, the Chazal only applied this Gezerah to swimming in a river or to swimming in something similar to a river. So you're not allowed to swim in the ocean, you're not allowed to swim in the river, you're not allowed to swim in a lake. If you dug out a pond in your yard, you're not allowed to go swimming in that pond because the pond is also similar to a river. In what sense is the pond similar to a river? What we're going to see is that if you have a pond that's in a depression in the ground so that the banks of the pond are level with the ground that's surrounding the pond, so when you splash around in the pond, water sloshes up out of the pond and it goes out onto the ground surrounding the pond. That is exactly the way a river or a lake or an ocean works, right? The river, it has banks. The water sometimes overflows the banks, sometimes goes back into the banks. A lake is the same way. So you made a little man-made lake, but it is very, very similar to a nahar. So the gzera against swimming would apply, but the gzera against swimming does not apply to swimming in a keli. So it doesn't apply to a bathtub. There is no isser against swimming in a bathtub. Really, there would be no isser, we're going to see. If you have an above-ground pool in your backyard, the isser d'Rabbanan against swimming, that of the gzera that's based on making a chavish shel shayatin, seemingly would not apply. Because that is not doimet to a nahar. It's not similar to swimming in a nahar. And again, we're dealing with Dinei D'Rabbanan. So Dinei D'Rabbanan have Gedarim. When Chazal made Isurei D'Rabbanan, they made rules. When it applies, when it does not apply. The rule that Chazal made was that this Gzera applies to a Nahar or anything similar to a Nahar. Therefore, a swimming pool where, we're going to see this in the Mechaber, if the walls of the pool extend upwards above the ground, so it's not that the water overflows the pool and goes right out onto the ground. No, the pool has high walls that contain it. That is not doime to a nahar. And therefore, this gezerah of an Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming, gezerah shema yaseh chavish shel shayatin, does not apply. That's why the Mechaber says over here now, a berecha shebechotzer, if you dug out a pond in your backyard, so now you created something in your backyard that is doimet to a nahar, because the water overflows its banks right onto the ground that surrounds it. So you created a man-made pond that's doimet to a nahar, even though it's a chotzer, so there's no issue of haitzah, it is still aser. Why is it aser? Because the Yisod Rabbanan of Gzerah Sheba Yaseh Chavish Shayatin will apply. So now let's see it again inside in the Mechaber. That's why the Mechaber says, Ein shatan al panei hamayim, afilu bebrecha shebechotzer. Even if you created a brecha, you dug out a pond in your backyard and it's in a chotzer, so there is no issue of haitzah, because you're in a Rishus HaYachid, it's still aser. Why is it aser? Because of the Gzerah. Why? Because when the water overflows out of your man-made brecha, it's going to run up onto the ground around it, which is dami l'nahar. So it's similar to a nahar. Since it's similar to a nahar, the Gzerah Shem Yaseh Chavish Shayatin applies. But, says the Mechaber, v'im yesh la safa saviv. But if you made a brecha that has walls that extend upwards and contain the water within the pool, mutter, then it's mutter. Why? The kevan da afilu nekro amayim. Because since, even if water will try to escape from the pool, hasafa machazeres oisam limekaimam, the walls that you have surrounding it will redirect the water back into the pool. So the water is not just flowing out of the pool and flowing up onto the ground surrounding it. Heavy lake kli. Now it's not doimel nahar. Now it's like a big bathtub. And then we don't have the gzera of Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin. Now, interestingly enough, the Lavush says over here, the Lavush of the Shulchan Aruch Harav. I think it was the Lavush. I hope I'm right. I think it was the Lavush. Says, why is it that the Gzera of Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin doesn't apply in a pool, in a keli? He says, because it wasn't the derech to make a Chavish Shayatin for a keli. Now, it could be that there's a very good reason for that. I don't think that they ever, in their furthest dreams, envisioned what we call nowadays a swimming pool in a backyard. When they were talking about a keli, they were talking about a bathtub. Maybe a little bit of a large bathtub, right? But they weren't thinking of a pool that you do laps in. They weren't thinking about a pool that's 8 feet deep and 20 feet, 15 feet across and 30 feet long. They weren't thinking about that. We do make a chavish shayatin for swimming pools. So maybe the Gzera Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin would apply. Now, the truth is, it's not really going to be negayev to us, but we'll discuss that in a moment. But in any case, just to recap what we see over here in Siv Beis, there's an Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming. Why is there an Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming? Gzera Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin. What's wrong with making a Chavish Shayatin? Makib Patish Tikadmana, it would be an Issa D'Araisa. So there's an Issa D'Rabbanan against swimming. The Issa D'Rabbanan applies to anything that's doima to a nahar. What are we considering doima to a nahar? We're considering doima to a nahar to mean if you make a pool, a pond, in a fashion, in a manner, where if the water comes out of the banks, it just flows up over onto the ground, that's doima nahar. Therefore, the gzera against swimming, Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin, applies. Swimming in a keli is not doimel nahar. It has walls that contain the water. The water doesn't just flow out onto the ground. So therefore, that's not doimel nahar. There is no gzera against swimming because there's no concern. Shema Yaseh Chavish Shayatin. Another thing that we saw is if the swimming is taking place in Rishus Harabim, you have a Hitzah problem. You'll splash, you'll send water down Amis in Rishus Harabim. That's a Bazundara problem. That's a different problem. That's a Hitzah problem. Okay, now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting base. Al Panei Amayim. Biyod of a Raglov, Shegam Raglov Okar min Karka Amayim. We did this. Ice cutting Gimel. Bivrecha. You're not allowed to swim in a brecha. Says the Mishnah Berurah, a brecha, who mekaim kinus mayim. This is like a pond that was created to contain water, likvisa, maybe for laundering, a lishrois pishtan, or maybe to soak flax. It's a pool. It's a soaking pool or a laundering pool. And the Mechaber said, you're not allowed to swim in such a brecha, even if it's in a chotzer. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cutting dal shab chotzer, the ilu kisha brecha imedes b'rishus harabim. If this brecha would be located in the Rishus Harabim, it would be aser anyway. Shemayat is mayim baraglov chutzlar ba'amos, because you might splash with your feet and you might send water flying more than dalad amas. That would be haitzah. That would be haitzah dalad amas in Rishus Harabim. So in Rishus Harabim, forget the gzeira against swimming. There's a haitzah problem, says the Mechaber. But if it's in a chotzer, then there's the gzeira shemayasa chavish shel shayatin. Ois cotton hay. The Mechaber explained that this brecha is dami lanahar. It's similar to a river, and that's why we apply the gzeira d'Rabbanan against swimming, because it's dami lanahar. How is it doimel lanahar? Says the Chavetz Chaim, kishamayim yotzin min habrecha, when the water escapes out of the banks of the brecha, v'nimshachin b'chatzer mikoichai, and it goes flowing in the chatzer mikoichai, because of the koich of the person. Shadoicha hamayim b'yodav v'raglov, he's pushing the water with his hands and his feet b'shayatasai when he's swimming. That makes it doimit to a nahar. The heavy bichlal gzeira she'ein shatan al panei hamayim shemayaseh chavish shel shayatin. Therefore, since it's doimit to a nahar, the gzeira shemayaseh chavish shel shayatin applies. Excuse me. However, said the Mechaber, if this brecha has a safa, if it has high banks, explains the Mishnah Berurah, Kain kisalim givayim. It has high walls, mikol tzad, on every side, so that contains the water, and then the water doesn't flow out of it. Then it's not doimit to a nahar. Then the gzeira shemayaseh chavis shel shayatin does not apply. So when you get to the end of this sif beis, right? So you're learning this, and you're thinking, okay, what's the halacha of going swimming on Shabbos? Well, there's times that the gzeira shema yaseh chavis shel shayatin applies when it's doimel l'nahar. There's times that it doesn't apply when it's not doimel l'nahar. All right, I have a swimming pool in my backyard. I don't, but some people have a swimming pool in their backyard. It's not doimel l'nahar. It's not doimel l'nahar. The gzeira shouldn't apply. So does that mean that I could go swimming? No, it does not. And this is a halacha that we learned earlier when we were learning the halachas of rechitza. So if you take a look in Dirshu footnote number 1, he brings down over here, va'afa pishikenu me'ikar adin, even though me'ikar adin, you would seem to do the math and think that you could go swimming in your swimming pool. Kasav la'el, we spoke earlier in Siman Shin Chavav Sivkat Chav Aleph, Shamikam Makayim, Nagu Shaloilirchaitz Benahar Ibemikva Klal. We're noyig nowadays. We don't do rechitza, not in hot water, not in cold water, not in a mikvah, not in a pool, not in anything. Why? We're afraid that people are going to come to squeeze out their hair and be over on schita d'Rabbanan. We're afraid that they might use towels, get the towels wet. You're going to have problems of kaivis, of laundering. You'll have problems of schita, etc., etc. When we time him, noisafim. So do we go swimming? No, we don't go swimming. It doesn't matter if it's a keli. It doesn't matter if it's a pond. It doesn't matter if it's a lake. It doesn't matter if it's a nar. It doesn't matter if it's hot. It doesn't matter if it's cold. It's something that we are doing already for many, many, many years not to do. Moving along to Sif Gimel, where we're really going to kind of chazer iber, we're going to review really halachas that we learned already, largely. Says the Mechaber Sif Gimel, ein mitapchin, you're not allowed to clap. That means lahaklis kaf al kaf, to clap your hands together. V'loy misapkin. You can't be misapik. What does that mean? Lahakes kafa yorich. You're not allowed to bang your hands against your thighs to make noise. V'loy meraktin. And you're not allowed to dance. Gzeira shem yisakin kleishir. You're not allowed to do any of these things like we learned earlier because of the gzeira shem yisakin kleishir. So we spoke about this already at length in Shin Lamed Ches, in the previous Siman. You're not allowed to be things that are also because of Hashmas Koil. You're not allowed to use musical instruments. Not only are you not allowed to use musical instruments, you're not allowed to do any action that is done to create noise, derech shir v'simcha. So you're not allowed to clap, you're not allowed to dance. Dancing is not a problem of Hashmas Koil. Dancing is not because you're generating sound. Dancing is because dancing is something that you do to music, and therefore it's a problem. Once you start dancing, you want music. Now, Shem Yisaki Kli Shir. So all of these things are also Gzera Shem Yisaken Kli Shir. Continues the Mechaber, Va'afilu lahakos be'etzba ala karka. Even to bang your hand on the ground to make a tune. Oy al aluach, or on a board. Oy achas keneged achas kederech hamishoyrim. Or achas al achas, one finger against the other. A.K.A. snapping. I'm not a very good snapper. You're not allowed to snap. If you do it, kiderech hamishorim. You're not allowed to snap if you're doing it to create a pleasant beat or a pleasant melody. That's kiderech hamishorim, like the people who sing. So it's not snapping to get somebody's attention. That's something else. But snapping in a musical way would be also because of Gzera Shami Yisakid Klei Shir. Or to take nuts and rattle them around. So you're rattling around the nuts inside the shell. This is a primitive rattle in order, to play with a child. Or to shake a bell to try to calm a baby down. All of these things, the bell is a kli hamayuchad lashmas koil, right? You're using it in a musical fashion, definitely aser. Kol zeh, anything like this, v'kayotzabai, or similar to it, aser gzera shem yisaki kli shir. All of these things are aser because of the gzera shem yisaki kli shir. Ulasape klachayad mutter, but the clap klachayad, that is mutter. Now let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton zayin ein metapchen. You're not allowed to clap, etc. Bein be'evloi. Not only are you not allowed to do this in a derech simcha, you're not allowed to do it out of mourning. Sometimes somebody is mourning avelus, right? Oh, yeah, right? Sometimes they clap for avelus also. Or, says the Mishnah Berurah, ubachamasai, or out of anger. Somebody, can't believe it. La'oyer hatzar. I don't know exactly what the words are. La'oyer hatzar. La'oyer hatzar. Okay, maybe it means to arouse anger in other people. In other words, you're angry about something and you want to get other people worked up. So you're giving it to, come on, guy, So you're doing it to be ma'oyer hatzar or to be ma'oyer avelus. In all of these things, you're not allowed to do. Ubein machma simcha, or for simcha. The kulam mishum gzera shem yisaki klisher la'oyer ha'evel oy hasimcha. Apparently, by avelus, sometimes they got musical instruments, mournful sounding instruments, I guess, to be ma'ir the avelus, right? So all of these things where you're doing this activity to be mashmiya koil, and it's not just being mashmiya koil, you're being mashmiya koil, it is derech shir, right? Avelus, mournful music, is also derech shir. So all of these things would be aser gzera shemi yisaken Klei Shir. One of the things that the Mechaber mentioned is V'loy Meraktin. You're not allowed to dance. Says the Mishnah Berurah, famous Mishnah Berurah. Ubiyayim Simchas Torah, on Simchas Torah, Mutal Araked, you're allowed to dance, B'shasha Oimrim Kilusim de Torah, when they're singing songs of praise to the Torah HaKdosha. And by the way, really on Simchas Torah, the songs that are sung on Simchas Torah really should be praises of the Torah HaKdosha, praises of the Rabbeinu Shalom, but they should be focused on that, not stam songs. Mishum Kavod Torah. So b'yom Simchas Torah, mutal araked, you're allowed to dance. B'shat she'omrim kilusim the Torah, mishum Kavod Torah. Kevin the less bazeh ele mishum shvus. It's only Nisa D'Rabbanan, and they relaxed it for Kavod Torah. Aval b'shar simcha shal mitzvah kigoyin b'nisuin. But by any other type of simcha shal mitzvah, like a chasana, Afilu hachi aser, it still would be aser. V'gam l'chvayda Torah in kedai lahatir elu tipuach v'rikud. Even on Simchas Torah l'chvayda Torah, we're only matir tipuach. So tipuach is clapping, v'rikud dancing, v'loy kishkush b'parmoinim v'zugim. But you can't use bells, and you can't use any other kind of musical instruments. V'cholshke and sharklei shir the aser. We're only relaxing the Yisad Rabbanan in the context of clapping and dancing. We're not relaxing it on using any kind of instrumentation. Now, this is an interesting Mishnah Berurah over here. So I think the first, there's a Dirshu footnote here. Where is it? Oh, here. It's very interesting because what comes out of this Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches. Is very interesting. What's more chamor? What's more kal, I guess you would say? Where can we be more makel? Are we more makel on Simchas Torah, or are we more makel by a chasana? From this Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches, it's apparent we're more makel on Simchas Torah. On Simchas Torah we're makel, and we allow you to dance, we allow you to clap. But are we makel by a chasana to dance and clap if the chasana is on Shabbos? Mishnah Berurah says no. You could be makel, right? He says it clearly. You could be makel on Simchas Torah, you cover that Torah. But avol b'shai Simchas Shemizah k'goyim b'nisuin, you can't be makel. Now, what's interesting about that is that we learned earlier in Shin Lamed Ches, in Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud, right? We learned over there that there's a very big kula by a chuppah. By a chuppah on Shabbos, we had a kula to do Amira La'akum, to ask an Eini Yehudi to play musical instruments. And over there, we only have that kula for a chuppah. We don't have that kula for Simchas Torah. We have that kula for a chuppah. So which one are we more makel by? So it sounds almost like a little bit of a stira. It's very, very interesting. So, I mean, there are those that want to say that, and we had this earlier, we said, Ein Simchas Chassid V'Kala Ela Klei Shir. So the Klei Shir by the Chasana is just, you must have it. Ein Simchas Chassid V'Kala Ela B'Klei Shir. So that's why they wanted to be makel to ask an Eini Yehudi to play musical instruments by the chuppah. But there is no such thing, apparently, that Ein Simchas Torah B'Loi Klei Shir. We have Simchas Torah without Klei Shir all the time. But to dance, if you wouldn't be able to dance and you can't have music and you can't have anything else, where's the simcha? Everybody's going to stand by their seat in the Bismedrash and they're all going to sing? Okay, the other thing that I wanted to mention over here is that there's a cute Dirshu footnote over here, Dirshu footnote number 3. And this comes up very often. People make a siyum on Shabbos and they dance. So what's the heter to dance? The Mishnah Berurah just said, what do you mean? You could only dance on Simchas Torah, l'chvayda Torah. But by a siyum to go dance, or by a bar mitzvah on Shabbos, you have people dancing. This is not called dancing, Rabbi say. They don't make motions of dancing. All this is walking around in a circle. The typical dancing that's done nowadays by these events, lama machin arikud. They call it a rikud, but what kind of rikud? They're just walking around in a circle. That ain't much of a rikud. So Rav Shlomo Zalman would say that that's not dancing. We don't call that dancing. Okay, Mishnah Berurah is cutting tests. So the Mechaber said that you're not allowed to snap achas alachas kiderech hamishorim. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cutting tests achas kineged kigoy. Elu shemakin ba'ama al ha'agudel. They snap one finger against the thumb b'ni'ima, in a pleasant way. V'oisen bazeh tnuais arevois, and they make a sweet sound. So they make a sweet beat or something with their snapping. V'zeu shemasayim kiderech hamishorim. That's what the Mechaber meant when he said you're not allowed to do this. Kederech hamishorim. But if you do it in order to wake somebody up, mashma mimagad of Rab Deshari, the lav deresheru. That would be mutter because it's not derech shira. Okay, levi matcha bear b'teisev Shabbos shitas Rashi mashber del Rashi kam b'zeh yesh lahachmer v'chein mashber b'prima godim. You have those that are being machmer over here by snapping, even if it's not pleasant sounding. Now, why would that be? I mean, we already learned about this earlier in Shin Lamed Ches, and we spoke about this. We said that if you're doing something and it's not derech shir v'simcha, we mentioned over there. We mentioned over there. We mentioned banging on the door when it's not derech shira. If you're banging on the door, it's mutter. So we had this concept already that to do an activity, if it's not derech, that's also where we had it. When we spoke about scaring away the birds, we said, why are you not allowed to clap to scare away the birds? Because you might throw a rock and you might come to do a haitzah. But the clapping itself to scare away the birds was no problem. And we didn't bring down over there a machmir opinion that said that it is problematic. So why suddenly over here do we have a Tosefes Shabbos and a Prima Godim based on a Rashi saying that snapping is problematic even if it's not derech shir? So it seems that there's something about snapping. It seems that this is like a halacha miyuchid to snapping. That somehow snapping is a derech hamishoyrim. It's the derech hamishoyrim somehow to snap. Okay, let's just do the Ramah here and try to finish off Sif Gimel. Says the Ramah 2 lines off the bottom, Kuf Pei Hey Amid Beis Hagot. This that we find nowadays, that people clap on Shabbos and they dance on Shabbos and nobody objects. At least the Ramah experienced that in his days. It says the Ramah must be mishum demutav sheyushayim. He says there's no good reason for it. It's just mutav sheyushayim v'lo yimizidim. It's also. Why don't we protest? Because they're not going to listen, and then they'll do it b'mezid. But it's tak aser. There is no mocker there's no room for such a kula, says the Ramah. Then he says v'yeshayim mitra, those that want to suggest, and we spoke about this earlier, the bizman azakal shari. Could be nowadays the Gzeira Shemisaki Kleshir doesn't apply. The Einonu Bekian Basias Kleshir. People don't make Kleshir. Velekal Migzar Shemisaki Kleshir. Dibilsat Leshchiachu. Ve'efsher Shalzen Nagu Lahakal Bakoil. And maybe that's why people are so makel. Okay. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Ois Katan Yud on Kuf Pevav Amid Aleph. Lahakal Bakoil. The Ramah said maybe this is why people are makel, and his lashon was v'efsher shalzen nagul hakel bakoil. They're makel in everything. So the Ramah started off by saying nowadays people clap, people dance, and he said maybe the gzeir shebi yisachik lishir doesn't really apply nowadays, and that's why they're makel bakoil. They're makel on everything. Says the Mishnah, what is this everything? Says the Mishnah, Yod Laka Bakoil. Hai Laka Bakoil, Koil al Tipuach v'Sipuk v'Rikud. He only means clapping, banging your hands against your thigh, and dancing. V'Loyal Shar Dvarim Aniskarim B'Siv Zeh. But not on everything else that the Mechaber listed over here, which was banging your hand on the ground, banging on a board, snapping Gederech HaMishorim, rattling around a nut, playing with a bell. No, we can't be makel in those things. The only thing that the Ramah is suggesting maybe there's room to be makel by is clapping, banging against your leg, and dancing. That there was a makar to be makel because maybe Gzeri Shemisach Klishir doesn't apply. And Mishnah Berurah doesn't like it. He says, no, even clapping and everything else may be b'makom mitzvah, but other than that, we should not be makel. There is a fascinating and a rather famous biur halacha over here. Biur halacha dibur hamaschil lahakel bakoil. Very interesting. This is a very, very famous biur halacha where the biur halacha shrais chay v'kayam. He screams very loudly and very strenuously against dancing where it comes to mixed dancing. This is a very famous biur halacha. It starts off discussing just dancing on Shabbos and on Yom Tov and how we should not be makel with dancing against Shabbos and Yom Tov, and then it goes into a lengthy diatribe against places where the minig started becoming that not only was there dancing, but there was mixed dancing, and the horrifying averas that could come out of it, etc., etc. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for Liban HaTorah. The source of Liban HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom should send Yeshua Serfuas Panos and Shidduchim to all those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Biaskel Tzedek B'mher V'Yameinu Amen. Be well.